The moment you step out of your car in the Portland Japanese gardens, it demands your attention. Even the trees in the parking lots, the way they are pruned, it draws you inward and upward and to what lies beyond. It's like almost a big mystery. What is beyond? What is up there that I must see, that I must experience, that I must imbibe with the full sensory perceptions of my physical body as well as my mind and my emotions. And this is the mystique, I believe, in part at least, of the Japanese gardens in Portland and why they are so world famous. And as you can see, a lot of people coming here. The parking lot is full on both sides of the road from people coming to make pilgrimage to this beautiful spot. From the very beginning, almost the moment you step out of your car in the parking lot of the Portland Japanese gardens, these gardens beg you, invite you, summon you to come in, to engage you. Even the path that walks up leads up to the main entrance, the main gate of the Japanese gardens. You see right there, draws you in. Welcome to the renowned Portland, Oregon Japanese Gardens. Portland Japanese Gardens are reputed to be the top Japanese gardens in North America out of 300 Japanese gardens. And according to some experts, these are the top Japanese gardens in the world outside of Japan. And according to other experts, the Portland area Japanese gardens, Portland, Oregon Japanese gardens are in the top 10 Japanese gardens in the world, with the other 9 being in Japan itself. These gardens draw you in with alluring beauty, simplicity, artistry. From the very moment you step onto the path that leads up, you have plants, water features, rocks, almost like making a pilgrimage as you walk through a strolling path, demanding that you stop and enjoy and savor the tranquility, the beauty every step of the way as you make your way onward, upward to the visitor center, which then opens up into the 5 gardens of Portland's Japanese garden. Here's a beautiful little Japanese maple growing right outside the visitor center. And we'll take a look at that. Just unlike some of the ones down in the garden itself, this one is allowed to grow full because it's out here in the open. This is the style we do mostly, this kind of style in our pruning. We have a lot of Japanese maples and Good News Tree Service that we prune in this manner. So this looks like a Japanese red pine to me, Pinus densiflora. A lot of the interior side branches have been removed. I actually see a really bad pruning cut right there. Flush cut, really bad. Somebody didn't know what they were doing on that one right there. On top of it, they smeared it with, looks like they smeared it with tar. I don't know. Maybe it just got dark, which is also a no-no. That's a bad pruning cut. Anyway, really bad. The certified arborist, I never certify that. But generally speaking, glorious tree. All the foliage is on the top, and you can just see the architecture, the structure, beautiful red bark structure of this tree as we come into the main entrance gate here in the Japanese gardens in Portland. It makes a statement. Just very impactful as you walk in to the main gate here. This lace leaf maple, I've noticed top very short, diminutive foliage and branches. And then as you decline or move down to the lower part of the Japanese maple, the branches sweep downwards and outwards. They get wider and then they sweep downwards. So they've been pruned, trained, and probably weighted down. At the top we have a very small canopy, short and not very tall, and then they get wider and droopier as we go out. This lace leaf maple is a tangle of a plethora and a tangle of branches going every which way. Yet it works, it's beautiful. And there's lots of foliage on the inside as well as going to the outside. And its top is rather flattish. And as you move down the trunk, the crown of the tree, it gets wider. The branching pattern gets wider and droopier. Whereas this one here, similar, but it's the branches, instead of just going every which way, crisscrossing, kind of in a mishmash, these are all pretty much all going in the same direction, flowing outward like the spines of an umbrella. So a little different style of pruning, but still everything kind of flows out and downward, just in a more symmetrical manner. This is a magnolia. It's been pruned in an upward manner, branches upward, and the top, the foliage is short and rounded, so it's not very tall, and it's short. Again, this gives the appearance of more of a larger, more mature type tree, balanced, layered, and open space in between. These are viburnums. Again, short and flattish on top. Open, so light can get in, lots of moss being able to grow. And layered. And spreading. These hinokis are very open in the center. Very open and airy. Not a lot of foliage on the inside. Mostly bare branches. This clump of hinokis here. And most of the foliage is on the outside, which is a nice pruning technique because it allows you to see the architecture of the spine of the hinoki cypresses without the clutter of the interior foliage. And then we have a real thick outer skin of outer foliage, which effectively blocks the light going to the inside, which would make it difficult for small branches to exist on the inside, thanks to the thick foliage on the outside. So this allows one to see the spine and the architecture, the beautiful architecture of these trees. So this coast pine here, this is not, it has not been pruned in a, I should say, it has been pruned in a very natural manner. Something like you'd see at on the headlands, windswept headlands of the Oregon coast. There's a coast pine, Pinus contorta, and dark bark and nicely layered, and nearly all the under foliage has been plucked. Trunks are bare, and almost everything is growing down and up, but nothing underneath. Very clean, crisp look. Here we have a couple species of bamboo. This is a larger, thicker bamboo. I don't know the variety, but it's been pruned in a hedge. Very, very neat and orderly and very tidy. And you see the shoots have been plucked so that there's a certain amount of equidistancing between the shoots that are up, and then the top has been sheared. Make a really nice hedge. And then we flip around here. This is a smaller variety of bamboo, and it too, the branches are only about 1/2 inch in diameter or smaller, and other trunks I should say, and it too has been, the shoots have been plucked or snipped off so that there's an equidistance between the branches or the trunks, and the sides and the tops have been sheared, and even the individual shoots themselves have been kind of bonsaied to be kept short, like this one here. They've been snipped back and pruned in a bonsai manner here so that the branches are spreading and the tops stay short and natural, not just clipped, not just sheared, but actually pruning away so that the top shoots spread out laterally. Give it a real natural look on top. Even though this is kind of a square hedge, it is still very natural looking on top, not sheared. There's nothing sheared here. It's all been hand pruned. So here is a Stewartia japonica. I think it's a pseudocamellia, or Stewartia, as it's commonly called. And you can see the beautiful mottled, multicolored bark. And it has been pruned in a bonsai style. And it is clipped on the top and kept short. And it looks like a very, very natural shape, and everything's kind of pruned outward and upward. You can't get close to these. There's a moss garden here, and I don't want to step off the path, but these look like Japanese hollies. I can't quite tell, but I think they are. They're very mature, and they've been pruned in a cloud pruning style. So Niwaki, there are many different types and styles of pruning in Niwaki, which basically Niwaki just means garden trees, but in Japanese. But Niwaki, there's more. This is called cloud pruning, where these layers are pruned to look like clouds, kind of just floating in the sky, which is really beautiful in its own way. Not really natural. It's a really caricaturized view of pruning a tree. But the beautiful thing about Niwaki, it can be very natural type pruning, like you would see in natural bonsai up in the high alpine country of, subalpine and alpine country that we have around here in the Cascade Mountains, up in the 5, 6, 7,000 foot elevations, or the natural occurring Niwaki that occurs on the coastal headlands of some of the pine trees, or up in the Columbia River Gorge where a lot of wind, so you have fir and pine trees up there that are growing in a very windswept look. I also might mention along the Oregon coast you have the Pinus contortas, the coast pines, but you also have the Sitka spruce, Picea I never know how to pronounce it. Statentious. Anyway, as in Sitka, Sitka spruce. Anyway, that's a very naturalistic kind of pruning, and that's what we here in Western Oregon tend to like. But then there's the more stylized pruning, the caricaturized pruning. So you see that here in the Japanese gardens in Portland. You both see the real natural looking, as well as this more stylized, caricaturized, more of the artist's interpretation of what an ideal tree might look like. That's something that it's interesting. It's not primarily our style of pruning. Here's another one here, another Japanese holly that's been pruned in the cloud pruning method. It's nice. It's a nice look, and it's nice actually to have a mixture of both styles, the more natural style and the more idealized, caricaturized style. There's room, the more sheared look. Here's another Japanese holly. They've been sheared in the kind of pom-pom or the cloud pruning. Now this particular Japanese holly, they've really opened it up. So it has sun scald going on the inside, which, is in some spheres of aesthetic pruning, that's really bad. To open up a tree to sun scald. And that's actually, that sun scald there is oriented toward the south and the southwest. So that's definitely sun scald. And yet in Japanese pruning, that's not going to kill the tree. As you can see, the tree's trying to overgrow and heal itself. But in Japanese pruning, they sometimes encourage this because it gives the tree a weathered look. It gives a tree an old, archaic, ancient look. And in some of the bonsai, actual small pot pruning, they will actually gouge out. In fact, I'll show you an example of that in a minute, where they gouge out their pines and their trees to give it, and gouge it out with carving tools to give it a natural kind of aged, weathered look. I'm going to go show you this. We're here in the main entrance to the entrance area to the Japanese gardens, and so here is their little bonsai collection on display. And here is a Rocky Mountain juniper. This is a naturally collected species. This one is like 500 years old. So it's not that this collector has been or his family or his ancestors have been curating and pruning this for 500 years. It's that it got collected in the Rocky Mountains of the US, and it is 500 years old or thereabouts. I don't, who knows if they really did the dendrochronology on it, but these are very slow growing. They grow in the Cascades, or a type of juniper like this. But notice the dead wood. This is naturally occurring dead wood, and it was collected like this and brought down and then put in this pot. Okay, so this is naturally occurring dead wood. But here, on this Japanese red pine, Pinus densiflora, you can see this here is supposed to be 50 years old. And here they've actually gouged out. This is fresh wood here. This is not old wood, but somebody's actually taken the carving tools and they have actually gouged out to give it a weathered look. They've actually purposely injured this tree. And here's an older gouge. You can tell by the wood it's a lot older, but this is fresh. In fact, this pitch is still bleeding here. The tree is bleeding. And I have seen where they will actually take torches and actually burn this area to make it look like it went through a forest fire, to give it an aged, weathered look. Now as an ISA certified arborist, there's a train of thought that has been perpetuated by people like Dr. Alex Shigo, the late guru tree researcher, scientist who worked for the U.S. Forest Service, did a lot of pioneering research that there's an idea that you do not want to injure a tree such that you don't even climb a tree, a live tree with climbing spurs. You ascend into that tree with ropes and do nothing to injure the tree. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's wonderful. But here the Japanese, these the world's top pruners and gardeners that have been pruning and gardening for 1,300 years, well before the Europeans even thought about it, long before the International Society of Arboriculture came along, to tell us, and the ANSI standards to tell us how to prune and what to do and what not to do, long before Alex Shigo and all these other guys. And I'm not to discredit and discount what they're saying, but they have been doing this since the 7 and 800s, and they got it from the Chinese, from the Zen Buddhists and the Buddhists who came into Japan, who had been doing it before them in China. And we know, those of us that are arborists, we know that this will not kill a tree. A tree can survive this. And because it doesn't need a lot of foliage, I should say cambium, to survive. A tree branch can break off and it can hang on to the parent tree dangling there for years, just with a shred of bark and cambium supplying its needs. So here we see the Japanese have been breaking the rules of arboriculture for, and the Chinese, between the two of them, for thousands of years. And these trees are obviously surviving, just like this one over here. It's damaged, and it's got dead wood, and here it is surviving 500 years later. So anyway, it's amazing. They all have all these rules of what you should and shouldn't do as a certified arborist and all this. And yet we see in some cases the Japanese breaking these rules and oblivious to the rules that Western arboriculture has imposed on things. And again, I'm not to say discredit these rules. I'm just saying, you learn the rules, but you also know when to break the rules where it won't hurt the plant, where it won't be injurious to it, and where it actually will, maybe add to the beauty and aesthetics of it. And be honest with you, nature has been breaking these rules for thousands or millions of years. When branches break off of these big trees and tops bust out and the trees still survive, they heal themselves and create very interesting, sculpted, contorted types of flora that we think are beautiful. And yet when we get into the garden, Mrs. Smith's garden, we don't want to do anything that's going to ruin the symmetry and potentially hurt the tree. And I get it. I really do get it. You got to be careful with urban trees. They're more sensitive. They're in unnatural situations and circumstances. All as I'm talking, we'll kind of stroll through the garden here. And so we have to be very sensitive to plants in their non-native settings. But here, the Japanese gardens in Portland, these plants have all been imported, other than the Douglas fir trees that you see on the hillside and the big leaf maples. All these plants have been imported, have been brought in. Almost very few of them, other than the coastal pines, are native. There's almost nothing here that's native to Oregon, except the coast pine, like right there, that guy. He's native, Pinus contorta. But the rest of them are not native. And yet they're doing fine. They're being cared for. So, if you care for plants, amazing how many rules you can break if you know what you're doing and you're being attentive to the care and the needs of these plants. So right outside the restrooms here, and many other places in the garden, we have azaleas that have been sheared. And generally, pruning of plants in geometric shapes is frowned upon in many gardens, but it's not a bad thing if they are juxtaposed against naturally pruned trees and shrubs like these camellias back here and these pines. And so, but when all the plants in a garden are pruned in geometric shapes, squares, boxes, trapezoids, spheres, ovals, that gets boring, and that it's really unnatural looking. So here we have, but the Japanese have mix in here either side of the walkway going into the restrooms. Even the restrooms are beautifully decorated and landscaped. But here you have an azalea that's pruned more in a sheared look, and here's one next to it that is sheared, but then it's also got, you can look in here and see the open structure of it, which is beautiful in its own way. And this is not bad, because you go out into the woods and the mountains, or you along the coast, Oregon coast, and you will see whole hillsides growing in the sand dune areas of salal and Oregon grape and Oregon the evergreen huckleberry that's growing in these kind of shapes, and nobody's pruned them. And so, and then you see whole hillsides, a mix of huckleberry and salal growing like this. And it looks very natural. And then you'll have a pine sticking up out of the middle of it, a coast pine or a spruce tree, a Sitka spruce, or something like that. And it's very beautiful. And we think it's beautiful. And so the Japanese gardeners here have simply, in a sense, are replicating that, because Japan has a very similar climate to Oregon and Washington, to the Northwest. I think this is one reason this garden does so well here, is because it's a very similar climate. And so the techniques, gardening techniques, as well as the plant materials, there goes a squirrel, are very conducive to what you might see in Japan. They have the mountains, they have the coastal regions, and same with Oregon and Washington. We have the same thing here. And so this type of gardening and the plant materials lend themselves nicely to replicating the styles in Japan. Here's a dogwood tree, a very mature, beautiful dogwood tree. It's actually in bloom right there. And it is, there we go, there's one flower, but it's pruned in a you've got the trunk, and it's pruned in let me dial this down a little bit. And then you got the branches, a nice spreading branching pattern. And then you have the top that's been rounded. Now, the problem with this kind of pruning, and it's absolutely gorgeous, but it's intensive type pruning. When you round the top of a dogwood or a maple, such as this lovely here, this Japanese maple outside the pavilion here in the Japanese gardens in Portland. The problem with this is it's very, very labor intensive. So every year you've got to come in here and you've got to clip all of these sprouts down, because this tree wants to, it's phototropic. It's growing toward the light, and it wants to put up sprouts. Same with this one, not so much on the lace leaf maple over there, but on this one, it wants to put up sprouts. And so that means somebody's got to get up there with a ladder every year and clip these things down. And in our tree service business, people don't have the money, or they don't want to spend the money for us to come in every single year, sometimes maybe multiple times a year if you're really keeping a garden looking really, really in tip-top shape, primo. You may have to come in several times a year, not so much on a dogwood, but maybe on the Japanese maples, the uprights, and prune them down because they want to keep growing. So here we have another dogwood tree right here where they've let it grow a little bit taller. We pan in on this, and you see those top sprouts right up there, and they're letting that grow a little bit taller. And that's not such a bad thing, because this dogwood tree is not in a major focal point. It's kind of in a forest here with the other trees, and you see the big fir tree behind it as a backdrop. So letting that one grow a little bit taller, and even though there's shoots that are coming out, you can see those shoots popping out of the top of the crown right there. That's not terrible. But when you have a tree like this dogwood tree is out in the you know, it's a main focal point right here in this pavilion area. As you can see, you pan around, I mean, it's right there. This tree has to be kept a little bit more contained. Same thing with the upright Japanese maple behind it. So this is very labor intensive, and again, most of my clients don't want to spend the kind of money to have us come in several times a year and do this. They don't have the budgets for that. But it is beautiful to be able to do that. I do that in my own yard, but then I work for free in my own yard, so it's all okay. Here's a yew that has been pruned. I don't know what kind of yew it is, but anyway, I don't think it's an Irish yew. It's more of a low-growing type of a yew, but this has been pruned in a round manner, kind of cloud pruned, but then opened up in the center, which it's hard to see here. And I find this interesting. This is a weed, I forget the name of it. This here is a weed that grows in my yard and in the gravel, and it grows all over the place. And here they're letting it grow right next to the Corsican mint. I can put my hand on it and smell it. It smells like mint. And there's the gravel. So here, I'm the gravel. I'm standing on the gravel. This is the moss right there. So they've got 3 low-growing things growing here. And I don't know if these weeds are intentional or not. But they, in the right place, even weeds can be beautiful. You know, a weed is only something that you don't want. So what's a weed in one region of the world is a perennial or a plant or an annual or something beautiful in another part of the world. It's all subjective as to what is a weed and what is not a weed. And anyway, that's just a little interesting side note there. So we're walking through the what they call the flat garden here under the pavilion. And you see a little forest of coast pines out there. This is called the flat garden. And of course there's that gorgeous lace leaf maple, one of the biggest ones I've ever seen in my life. That was quite a job to get that in here. They dug it up somewhere and transplanted it, but absolutely a glorious centerpiece of this garden here. And here we see a weeping cherry tree with props, supports, so that it doesn't collapse under its own weight as it spreads out. And even the props are beautiful. Natural looking wood set on stone bases, as you can see there and there. But here this is pruned in a weeping manner. We do a lot of cherry trees at Good News Tree Service, a lot of cherry trees. And here they've pretty much stripped out everything out of the center of the tree, and they left it in an umbrella shape. And that's one way to prune. It's absolutely glorious, beautiful. One way to prune, and allows the moss to grow and not a lot of competition with foliage. You do have a few little branches on the inside. Well, here is a yew that has been sheared, and it was sheared too late in the season. It looks like it was sheared recently, but it was sheared too late in the season. That's why we have this sun scald going on here. Right here, see the sun scald. So they sheared this too late. Should have done it earlier. They might have made the mistake like I made. Summer started this year in early July, and maybe they pruned it in June, figuring that they'd still have another month of of growth to do so that the plants could acclimate to the summer heat. And then summer hit a month early, and it sunburned these plants. That's an easy mistake to make because of climate change. Weather patterns have been disrupted, and sometimes you think you've got some more time to prune so that the trees have a time to acclimate before the summer heat hits, and then summer heat hits a month earlier than what you expected, and now you're going to get dieback due to the inner foliage of trees being exposed to the sun that have not had a chance to harden off. So anyway, just a little side note there. Here's a dead azalea. Okay, the reason I focus this is that as well as these gardens are cared for and manicured, sometimes they lose a plant. These guys are experts. You know they are. But despite their best efforts, every once in a while, a plant just up and dies. So those of us that happens to, even though we're experts, we can't win all the battles. We lose sometimes, and a plant will die just for whatever reason, and we don't always know why. It just up and dies. And so I'm sure it's very rare up here at the Japanese Gardens in Portland, but it does happen. So take heart. Even the experts lose the battle once in a while. So I'm stepping out here on the terrace in front of the pavilion, and this is downtown Portland. If it weren't cloudy, you would see Mount Hood, one of the most glorious views of Mount Hood, kind of the patron saint mountain. It would be right out here, looming right up in the sky up there. And then if we look down here, there's the world famous Portland Rose Gardens. And there's a jogger jogging by, and the roses are in full bloom. Well, that's the Japanese Gardens are right across the street from the Rose Gardens, but we're not doing a tour of the Rose Gardens today, so we'll leave that one for another day. So here, as we're making our way out of the flat garden, here are a phalanx of rhododendrons that have been let grow tall, which is very nice. You can't always let your rhododendrons and camellias, there's a camellia popped in there too. You can't always let them grow tall because often they're in front of houses, in front of windows. They may be blocking things. But when you can let your rhododendrons grow tall, like these, because they're against a backdrop. There's a Hinoki cypress there, and then you've got the Western red cedar, and you've got these giant fir trees that are, 100 or more feet tall. And so here you have a stair step, these rhodies, the low growing, and then you have the intermediate, the wall of rhododendrons, and here you have a lace-leaf Japanese maple, which is a crimson color, so it makes a really nice contrast against the foliage, as well as the color against the broad leaves of the dark green rhododendrons. And then you've got the intermediate, a couple of Hinoki cypresses back there, and then you've got I even see a incense cedar back here. And then you got the giant cedars, Western red cedars, and the Douglas firs up there growing. So it's nice to let the rhododendrons grow tall when you can. That you're going to get foliage, you're going to get blooms every year, and that's beautiful. Without you're not cutting back the new shoots, because rhododendrons bloom on second-year wood. And then you have all of they've cleaned everything out, so you can look through the foliage here and see the inner structure, the architecture of these rhododendrons, which is absolutely glorious. Here we can see the structure of a Japanese maple that's been reaching skyward and has been pruned almost in a vase shape with lots of moss. And the moss, I get asked this a lot. Does moss hurt my trees, mosses and lichens? And I go like, yeah, if it did, then I guess all the trees out in the rainforests that we have around here that have moss dripping off of them, like, whatever, some of them are feet long, would all be dying, but they're all healthy as can be. And then people go, oh yeah, right. Yeah, that's true. That makes sense. So no, leave the moss on there. It's not hurting the trees. And it is a beautiful beautiful thing. And actually moss collects nitrogen from the rain, and then the nitrogen, the moss, the water, the nitrogen-laden rainwater soaks into the moss, and then it, like a sponge, and it flows out and down the trunks, and when moss drops off as well, it actually fertilizes the tree and gives them nitrogen. So moss is very, very beneficial to trees in several ways. It doesn't hurt at all. In most cases, there are some examples where moss can choke out. I've seen it choke out azaleas and small, maybe even some small tiny needled pines where it actually choked them out. That's a whole nother issue, but generally speaking, in larger trees, it's not a problem at all. Just walk around the other side of it. You can really see the structure silhouetted against the sky. Here it is from this side, reaching for the sky, and behind it is the backdrop of the big fir trees. Now we're making our way down into the strolling gardens where the pond and the ponds are, and the stream and the waterfalls. And we'll make some comments as we go down here. We're walking down to the upper pond, and as we look at it here, we see along the edge of the pond the Pyrus japonicas, the andromedas or lily of the valley shrubs, as well as some Japanese maples like this one here, upright variety. And they have been pruned in a way that, again, normally we don't like this style of pruning. People often do it in front of their houses where they leave the branches bare, the trunks, and then they leave a pom-pom look on top. People think it's beautiful, and it reveals, you can look through the plants and see the base of their houses, their foundations, the side of the house, and so forth. And that's really ugly. But here it works because, A, you're looking through and seeing the pond, and you're getting depth and dimension. So again, bad pruning, I put the word bad in quotes, works if it's in the right place. But some people, this is the only style of pruning they know how to do around their yard. And all their rhododendrons, all their Pyrus japonicas, all their this, that, and everything, they do that with everything. And it looks really ugly. And yet here, there's a purpose to it. So you can look through it and see the water, see the lantern down there. And even the Japanese maple up here, it's been thinned out so you can look through and see depth and dimension and see off in the distance, and it draws you in and it engages you. So this is very thoughtful. All the plants up here are open, so you can look through and see this moss garden that goes down to the stream, down to the river. So all the plants are open to give you, if these were all left full, they would be very, you'd feel closed in and boxed in, and you would not be able to look through the garden and be drawn into it and want to go further, because you'd just be walled in. But this garden is very engaging, and it's very, it just pulls you forward, and it engages the human mind and the psyche and the emotions as you walk through. Everything is pruned in a way to draw you in and to make you feel a part of things. Now we're heading over the bridge, and here we see again this is actually a styrex, been pruned, styrex, or Japanese snowbell tree, Styrex japonica, pruned in a very low-growing, open manner over this pond. And there's the little waterfalls at the far end. And then you look up here, and we talked earlier about cloud pruning. Here's a whole bank full of azaleas along the edge of the pond, as well as up just below above where that man is walking right now. You see his head popping out here in a minute. All of these are all cloud pruned. So actually, this kind of shearing works. In the springtime, that hill comes alive as the azaleas bloom for a couple, 3 weeks. And so here it works as a backdrop to the more sculpted and open style of pruning is going on around here, and more natural type pruning around this waterfall. And on the other side of the bridge, the stream flows out of the lake, and again, it's very natural. All the pruning here is very natural to replicate basically a mountain stream. So we have Styrex japonicas, we've got some hinokis, we've got Japanese hollies, there's some more low-growing hinokis, there's a skimia down there, there's another Pyrus japonica, a yew, a lace-leaf Japanese maple, another Pyrus japonica, and then a flanks of upright Japanese maples. They don't use a lot of varieties of plants. It's very simple and a lot of repetition, which repetition, it can be boring, but if it's done properly, it can actually be very unifying and very, well, you go out into the woods and you don't see a lot of varieties of plants. I mean, in Oregon you do, in Washington, but it's not like an arboretum where you have 1,000 varieties of plants in an acre. Now you get down to the Central America and in the tropical areas, and you may have hundreds of different tree species, but not around here. So this is not uncommon to have, in nature, to have just a small variety of plants. Now here's another. This is like a Japanese table pine, and that's absolutely gorgeous. I think it's a type of Japanese red pine. And we pan around here, and I mentioned a little bit earlier ago that every once in a while a plant dies, even in the Japanese gardens. And I bet they're struggling with climate change up here too, with drought. Even though this garden is well watered, this is a hemlock that is dying here in this hedge of hemlocks. And it's really, here's another one that's dying. You see, these trees need lots of water, and when we get a lot of drought, some of them don't get as much water as they need. This may be a dry spot in the irrigation system. I'm looking here in the irrigation system, and it's all wet down there, and it's dry here. That tells me that spot was not getting enough moisture, and that tree died because of that. And we've been getting a lot of hot weather. It's been very dry, and the plants are just struggling with that. We're losing some trees and some plants. It's really, in a garden of this size, it's very hard to keep track of everything, every plant, and all of its water needs. So there's going to be some casualties along the way. Anyway, here's another look at the pond, and there's the bridge we just came off of right there. And then here's a little closer look at the hillside that is covered with azaleas, sprinkled with some lace leaf maples. And here, interestingly enough, they've blended the artificial, I don't know, artificial, but the non-native species. But here you got sword fern, which is a native species, thimbleberry up here on this hillside, and here we have hazel, which grows native. It's a hazelnut. It's a wild species of hazelnut. And of course, then you have the non-native invasive species, the English ivy, that grows everywhere. And I'm sure they're working very hard to keep it off the trees. And it's working its way down the bank along with the trailing native blackberry. And there's other weeds up there. But here they have, I don't know if they have purposely, but they've merged the natural woods with the garden here that is highly manicured and all non-native species. We're going to walk down here to the tea garden. Now we're walking into the tea garden where they have their tea ceremonies. And I think in America, I think we should have a coffee garden. The Japanese love tea, and God bless them. It's something I don't understand, and it's a very. There's the tea house. It's something that is really endemic to their culture. It's highly significant and very ritualistic, and it's very important to them. Probably like coffee is, except for coffee, for us, coffee's just a thing to get us out the door in the morning. But for tea, the tea ceremony is very important, and that's all I really know about it. I've studied it, but I can't, as a Westerner, I can't really focus my mind or understand the implications of it. And so I don't want to comment about it negatively. But anyway, here you have a whole forest of upright Japanese maples, and again, they've opened it up so that you've got a canopy on top, very open and airy look, and light comes through, so that these hemlocks are kind of they can be do very well as an understory tree, and these are doing very well as an understory tree here in the shade. And then you have the rhododendrons, the pyrus japonicas, the azaleas. Here's another skimia. Skimia loves shade. Of course, the sword ferns don't. That's a native species. They don't mind the shade. And then you got the grass. The moss. The mosses, all different kinds of mosses growing down here. Instead of lawns, we have mosses, and absolutely gorgeous. The great thing about moss, and then there's the Corsican mint down there too. Beautiful little odoriferous creeping shrub or plant. And the beautiful thing about one of the drawbacks about moss gardens is you got to get out here constantly and be weeding. Little weeds will pop up, and these moss gardens are meticulous. There's no weeds. I've been here before when guys and gals are out there with their little tweezers and picking the weeds out. And these are absolutely meticulous, the way they keep them. Absolutely phenomenal, the beauty of it all. But a lot of work to keep it looking like this. So here's a burning bush. It's kind of growing in the shade here. I'll guarantee you this burning bush will not turn bright red foliage in the fall, because burning bushes need direct sunlight to turn red, and the parts of the trees that turn red are the parts that are exposed to the sunlight, and if not exposed to sunlight, they will not turn red. But here they've pruned it in a very open manner. Again, we're in the back side of the tea garden, and walking through the strolling garden area of the tea garden, or outside the tea garden. And again, everything's really open. And I'm not always a big fan of everything being pruned out so it's really open. But here it works because it makes things look more spacious, and you can see out, and you don't feel closed in, boxed in. You know, like with all pruning, there's a time and a place for openness. There's a time and a place for things being hedged and clear and being left full, and that's going to be up to the discretion of the designer and the landscape architect person, or the people who are pruning the garden. Well, here's this is like a podocarpus. It's the first one I've seen. Got a lot of mosses growing on it, but beautiful. I would have thought I would have seen more of these around here. I haven't seen any Japanese yew plums either, but anyway, this looks like a podocarpus tree that they've been pruning, and it's really open, beautiful. Let's see if we can get around, look at it from another angle. There, the light's not so glaring. And then here's another native species. I've seen a few of these. This is a huckleberry. These grow native in our area around here, and they have red berries. And what a wonderful thing to have sprinkled in your landscape, something very native. Here is a juxtaposition and the interposition of native species with non-native species. This is next to I'm not sure what this is actually. It looks like a Pyrus japonica that's been really pruned back heavily. I think, no it isn't. Here's the fruit on it. This may actually be a styrex. I don't know. But then there's another native species down here. This sword fern. There's another one here. And they sprinkle these throughout. Sword ferns are very, very wonderful. Here's actually another type of fern. I don't know what kind of fern. I thought it was a bracken fern at first, but I don't think it is. That's another kind of fern. But they've got ferns throughout. Ferns are wonderful. The way they droop over the rocks and just kind of at the base of plants, they kind of come up and just give you that kind of that woodsy, native, sometimes almost a tropical look. And we're coming down here to the koi ponds. And we got workers working. And this is the continuation of the stream from the upper pond that we just came from, the Bridge North Rocks. And here we have workers that are working. And they're working in among these iris and cleaning and keeping the weeds out. And here's the koi. So here these ferns are. It looks like they're kind of invading the iris. So these guys are cleaning them out. So here's the lower pond. Walk around here to the main viewing area. And this is probably one of the most iconic features of the Japanese gardens here in Portland is this waterfall. So beautiful. The koi just swimming around effortlessly. And again, here we see the Japanese maples when we pan out. Japanese maples and the azaleas and Japanese hollies and rhododendrons, and there's a vine maple up there. That's a native species. Some more vine maples mixed in with the Japanese maples. And then you've got some of the native ferns here, the lady ferns and the sword ferns. There's some deer ferns over there. But then as you go up the hillside, it blends in to the native species. The western red cedar, Douglas fir, big leaf maple, Acer macrofolium, and other things. There's a tree up there. I can't tell from here what it is. It almost looks like I don't know if it's a lowland grand fir or maybe a really large Pacific yew. I don't know. I can't see from this distance. I'd have to look at the needles in the bark. But anyway, so as you go up the hillside, this garden just blends in with the native hillside. Absolutely gorgeous. So we're coming up from the strolling garden where the pond is and the waterfall, and here we have the only piece of grass in the whole Japanese garden, the only lawn. And I guess lawns aren't a real common. I haven't been to Japan yet, but they're not real common in Japan, at least not in the Japanese gardens that I've visited. And they prefer moss gardens, which I think are a lot more interesting, but you don't want to be walking on them a lot. So they're beautiful to look at, but probably not the best idea for a lot of heavy foot traffic. Whereas we in the West here, we like our lawns. We want to get out and play on the grass and have a place where our dogs can do their business. And in Japan, I think the idea, the ethos of the Japanese is that gardens are more of a sacred kind of a place. And I think that is a beautiful sentiment that's rooted actually in the Bible. I'm sure the Japanese are by and large pretty unaware of that. aspect of things. But the Bible, there at the beginning in Genesis 1 and 2 and 3, God planted, if you will, human beings in a garden and told them to dress and take care of the garden. And I think the Japanese, God bless them, the Japanese people have a real sense of this. It's part of their Buddhist, Shinto religious background, where man is at one with nature and must keep the garden, and gardens are a place of beauty, kind of celestial presence, and a place where human beings can go to heal and to restore. Now we're starting to walk into the natural garden. And I'll keep talking as we walk down here into this natural garden. There are 5 gardens here in the Japanese gardens. 5, and this is one of the things that makes this garden unique, is that it has all 5 main types of Japanese gardens in it. We'll talk about that in a bit. But anyway, most Japanese gardens, my understanding, aren't able to have all 5 types of the traditional Japanese gardens, whereas the Portland Japanese gardens has all 5 types. So this is the natural garden, and but the Japanese, and I wish I understood it more. I don't claim to know more than I do, but they have a sense, almost like the indigenous peoples in North America and other cultures. They have a sense of nature, and man being at one with nature, and man being a part of nature, and man needing to, humans, I don't want to say man, but you know what I mean, generically speaking, humans need to flow and move with nature, take care of it, almost venerate it in a certain way. I don't believe in nature worship, but I do believe in respecting the dignity and the beauty of nature. For me, nature points to God. I'm a believer in the God of the Bible. Make no apologies about that. And to me, this points to Him. The created points to the Creator. And a lot of native and ancient cultures have a better sense of that than we do in the West, where we have become hyper secularized, hyper rationalized, where we are out of touch with nature in so many ways. And yet we, as has been noted, human beings have largely been in an agrarian horticultural society for their entire non-citified society and culture until very recently in the long history of humanity on this planet. And so I think it's something, gardening and horticulture and agriculture and animal husbandry and these kinds of things are really an important part of the human psyche. It's deeply rooted probably in our DNA, and I believe, as a Bible believer, that it goes back to God creating human beings and putting them in a garden. I mean, the book of Genesis opens up with a garden, and then the Bible in the book of Revelation ends with a garden called the New Jerusalem, New Heavens, New Earth. And man will be those that pass the test, those that meet the Maker, the Creator's qualifications, will have the privilege of spending eternity in a garden called the New Jerusalem. So the Bible opens with a garden and it closes with a garden. An absolutely beautiful thing. I mean, it's mind-boggling, I think. As a horticulturalist myself, I'm totally entranced and enraptured by gardens and the beauty of nature. And the Japanese have pioneered the Shinrin-yoku, the concept of forest bathing, and even medical experts in Japan have done research to show that the concept of forest bathing or nature therapy, that when we take a stroll through a forest or a garden, it actually improves our health in so many ways, not only just emotionally and the parasympathetic aspects of our physiology, but also blood pressure, reduces the killer cells that attack cancer cells in our blood system. They are increased, and all kinds of many studies have been done, books have been written that identify the benefits of being out in a forest and just slowing down and enjoying all the forest and plants and a garden has to offer. Not to mention the smells, the fragrances of the botanicals, the essential oils, if you will, that are given off by many plants, which are beneficial to human beings and often are the basis for a lot of our pharmaceuticals that have taken these and made medicines out of them, or have synthesized them and replicated them and made medicines that are very beneficial to human beings in fighting diseases and these kinds of things. So it is a beautiful, beautiful thing, this walking through a forest, both psychologically and physically. This is the flat garden. This kind of replicates a seashore. This is kind of the smallest garden in the Japanese gardens here in Portland. And this is interesting to me, but it doesn't really do much for me. It's nice, but it's, I guess it's a meditative place. There's a gentleman over there sitting on the stones on a bench looking out, and it's beautiful with the backdrop of the trees. But anyway, this is another one of the traditional gardens in the panoply of Japanese gardening. So we're going to continue up. Here's some more bamboo, been pruned in a beautiful way. Here's a vine maple, one of our native species. And again, we've already commented on most of these shrubs, the pruning styles. So we're just going to walk up this path here and move out of this area. So as we're moving out of the natural garden, this is a little vista, little patio that overlooks. And here we see, overlooks the hillside. So here we see in the foreground the camellia, Pyrus japonica, hinoki cypress, another azalea. And then here's a vine maple. And here's some pine trees. Looks like a Japanese red pine, I'm guessing, right here. And then behind that we have more vine maples. And then we have, it opens up into, looks like a beech tree back there. Non-native species, more vine maples. And then you look in and you can see the firs. So here behind the firs and the cedars and stuff. So here we see a panorama looking out over the top. You feel like you're looking over the top of the trees, the way this has been designed and pruned. And these trees have to be kept low in here so you can look through and see what's beyond. Another beautiful little vantage point here in the Japanese gardens. And of course there's rocks everywhere. We haven't even commented on the rocks. I'm mostly focusing on the plants. But rocks everywhere. Rocks are like the foundation, if you will, of the Japanese gardens. They're the foundation, and then the pine trees, primarily the pine trees are the backbone. Secondarily, after that, the Japanese maples, the cherry trees, and are the next most important plants in the Japanese garden. Here is a magnolia that is pruned in a kind of a cloud pruning Niwaki style. And this is beautiful. But the problem is with magnolias, they're one of the fastest growing shrubs in the garden. This tree will have to be pruned multiple times every season because it grows so quickly. And so I like this pruning. This is beautiful. But most arborists aren't able to do this kind of pruning because it requires constant upkeep as the shoots grow. And so you're going to be in Mrs. Smith's garden pruning this multiple times during the summer to keep it looking like this, to keep up with the shoots. And Mrs. Smith usually doesn't want to pay a crew of arborists to come in and to do this several times a year. It's just not in her budget. That's why when we prune these, we normally let them grow tall and full and thin them out. But we don't prune them like this. Now, I will prune these kind of things in my garden, prune this manner because I like pruning, and B, it's my garden and I want it to look right. And my labor is free. But Mrs. Smith usually doesn't want to pay a tree service, arborists, aesthetic pruners to come in and hundreds of dollars maybe each time they step foot on her property to intensively prune her trees. Although I would love the opportunity to do that, to showcase to Mrs. Smith or Mr. Jones or whoever what we can do and what is possible. But it's just normally not possible in your normal residential garden situation, and that's why we don't do a lot of this kind of pruning. It's sad, but it's just the reality of it.